Hey, everybody. This is the With You Collective podcast where we're creatively imagining God with us. This is episode 2. My name is Glenn. I'm here with my good friend Jess.
Hi, friends.
And today we're talking about creativity. We're talking about creativity, what it looks like in our lives, what things have been inspiring us lately, and generally just kind of having a general conversation about creativity and the things that it brings. So that's what we're talking today. And with that, I think we're going to kind of just start in with some questions.
Yeah, this is probably going to be a little more off the cuff than our last podcast, just because we're even curious to talk to each other about this because we haven't talked about this all that much. So I think the biggest question to start with for you, Glenn, is what has been inspiring you lately? Like specifically lately.
Yes.
What has been the most inspiring thing that you've come across?
Yeah, I think it's probably a twofold answer. What's been inspiring me lately, and then specifically, lately, I would say there's an album by Niels Fromm, who I think he's a classically trained pianist. If not, he's just ridiculously good. But then he also combined, the album specifically is called Spaces. And so he does like classical piano stuff, but it's all his own compositions. But he also then, in this same show and same album, has very synth-driven nature to it. I guess you would say it has it's an interesting combination of organic and digital.
Okay.
That just comes together in a really cool way. And he is just musically genius.
Okay.
I mean, it's really good. Even just down to there's a clip on YouTube that I'll try and put in the show notes as well. It's not even a clip. It's like a 40-minute, 30-minute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 30-minute concert essentially recorded that's on YouTube. And you just get a sense of like how into it creatively he is. And just from a creative standpoint, it's pretty incredible. And specifically what intrigues me about that, I think, has been this idea of just playing with sounds. And so everything from listening to the world around me and just listening to what are some sounds that are going on around me that I can record and incorporate into my recordings, into my songs, or even change them, make them something that they're not.
Yeah.
Just sounds that are interesting, essentially.
Okay.
So,
what's an example of that? Like, what's an example of a sound that you've recorded?
Yes. So I have a stainless steel water bottle.
Okay.
That when I set it down on the table once, it fell over. It was closed, but it fell over and it made this funky sound. Because it's stainless steel, it kind of had a ringing kind of sound. It was almost like a bell, but it also had water sloshing in it. So it had some like whooshy bell-like tones, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Okay.
And so I pulled that into my computer and did some work on it and made it into an instrument that I could then play.
That's awesome.
With a MIDI keyboard as an instrument.
That's awesome. I love hearing how you incorporate it into your work.
Yeah.
Because that's something I find difficult to do, is like the things that inspire me, how am I actually incorporating it into the work? Yeah. So that's cool to hear that.
Yeah. So I guess the same question to you then. What's been inspiring you lately, specifically?
Yeah, I feel like there are a couple ways I could go with this, but I'll kind of choose two things.
Okay.
So last time I said I've always loved stories. So for me, I love people's stories, like talking with people, hearing like their background and their testimonies. But I also my husband and I love watching movies together and like reading books and stuff. So there have been a few like scenes, I would say, in some films lately that I've been intrigued by. Probably to put an overarching theme on it, I'm inspired by tone, like relational tone. And so I think that's communicated in a lot of different ways. But a couple examples, one movie I watched, it was actually probably quite a while ago now that I think about it, but it's the movie called Wonder. Okay. And it's basically this film about a boy who has a disfigured face and how that how he has experienced life because of that, and how his family has as well. And there was many scenes in that I loved, but there was one in particular that was intriguing to me of the relationship between this boy's sister and his mom. And the sister loves her brother very much, but she is feeling a bit like he gets a lot of the care and attention. It is difficult for her, even though she loves him so much.
Yeah.
So there's this scene in the movie where she's in a play and she kind of unexpectedly gets to have a bigger role in it than she even thought. Like she was kind of an understudy who got this role. And her parents are in the audience and they don't know that this is happening. And then all of a sudden she's like on stage. And the mom, they do a lot of shots of the mom's face during that. And then afterwards, this is going to be hard to describe without using hand motions, but like the mom basically sees her daughter across the room and she just points to her with this like prideful smile and like tears and is mouthing the word you. Like, you. This is about you. You are amazing. Like, it was just this beautiful tone that was conveyed just by this, like, simple motion.
Totally.
So that kind of thing. Another one I would say is I watched a clip of a scene from A Star is Born.
Okay.
And I was really touched by this, too. It was this moment in the film where this girl is getting this chance to sing a song for the first time in front of a large audience. And she's very nervous about it. And the guy in the film basically comes over to her and, like, kind of grabs her arms and says something like, all you have to do is trust me. All you have to do is trust me. And she ends up coming out after a while. And then it's like this amazing moment where everybody's, you know, super excited for her and loves what she's doing.
Yeah.
But I think the whole scene, and if you've seen this before, I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Maybe we even find a clip of this to put on. But
sure.
I think the whole scene, I'm so struck by the relationship there. It's this like huge moment for her, but he's there, like sometimes he's with her, singing with her. Sometimes he's in the background watching her and just like kind of encouraging her. So all that to say, I am super inspired by tone. And I think part of that is because I love supporting artists too. And like seeing people supported, seeing artists supported from my like directing background. So I'm just really drawn to that kind of stuff. Now, how I put that in my work, I don't always know, which is why I mentioned this is kind of hard. But I think I'm just always inspired by tone. And so if I can create some of that tone or that feel that I'm sensing from like a scene in a film, for example, I would try to capture that tone, even if it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say in reading the stuff that you've written, that's pretty clear.
Okay,
that
well, good.
Tone, that tone plays a big part of what you do and how you write and how you interact even within the story itself. There's such a tone piece. So that's cool to hear that
Awesome.
that is kind of the inspiration. And some of the places that it comes from seems to be film. Some of the things you've read too,
Oh, for sure. Like I think I mentioned last time that Wing Feather Saga. I love that. I can get into this more later, but I would definitely also say the word. There are so many little nuggets that you pick up on when you like really sit with this passage. So that for sure, is probably the basis of the inspiration for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the purpose of this question, I will say the film and the stories, just because those are things that I've noticed more recently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Very
so
cool.
I feel like we talked a little bit about how you incorporate those things into your work, but do you have anything else that you would add? Like, even if it's not sound, like what are other things?
Sound is one of the biggest things, just because, a lot of what I do is kind of composing both from an arrangement standpoint, but also from a tone standpoint. I like to approach things from kind of the listener's perspective, but not just the listener of music. I like to do my best to try and incorporate listening through the ears of a recorder, if you will, to the world around me. So listening to this album by Niels Fromm has been great just because it seems like he's got somewhat of a similar bent in just the way that he uses his synthesizers and his pianos together. And like there's parts where he's playing his piano, and I don't remember if this is in that YouTube clip, but he's playing his piano with like drum brushes. Like he's actually playing the strings of this grand piano by not hitting the keys, but he's playing them with drum brushes. There's just all sorts of these creative things that, for me, I think sound is one of the biggest things that draws me in. And these things that inspire me, you know, from a performance by him or something like that, I think in a way challenges me to try and pull that in, you know, to my own workflow.
It gets you out of your head, like out of the box.
And to just try things. Like sometimes it's just the encouragement to be like, oh, wow, he played a piano with drum brushes. I should try something different, you know, something that I haven't tried before.
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, like I said, the incorporation of what inspires me and what I've recently been paying attention to is sometimes exactly that. What does it almost challenge you with that you might not have been challenged with before listening to that piece or whatever it is? Another thing too, I feel like recently I've been paying really close attention to orchestral film scores. You know, like listen to some Hans Zimmer stuff and some John Williams, and just like listening to the orchestra. And I was a music minor, and I took music theory, and one of the things we had to do was do score analysis. So we would have to, you know, pay attention to and write out and take note of these orchestral scores and watch what kind of melodic lines are happening and things. And I'd gotten away from that a little bit, you know, because sometimes you get away from the technical, with quotes, to get closer to the creative. But recently it's been interesting. I've been finding that almost going back to some technical, just in my listening even, has brought out a bit more creativity. So that's a very, very roundabout way to say, I think what I incorporate into my own work creatively comes from watching and emulating, but also being challenged by other people's work. And again, just trying to make something that's my own that may have been inspired by somebody else.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the idea of like it challenging you to try something new.
Yeah.
Because that is such a big part of the creative process.
Absolutely.
That can be really hard.
Yes.
But
Do you feel like it's the same with your writing? I mean, how does that work, you know, with writing? I'm not a writer. I'm far from a writer.
Yeah.
But again, with music, you know, you can have that kind of an inspiration where you take it and you almost change it. And how does that all work with writing for you?
Well, I mean, I'm still learning too. But I would say, so like one of the parts of my process is I have this journal. I'm literally pointing to it right now on the desk. But I have like currently 3 sections in there for stories that I'm interested in writing. So whenever I hear a phrase or a song, like that does happen for me too sometimes. Or, you know, see something that makes me think of that character, I'll write it down. There have been times where I have literally used that in the story. And then there are times, again, where I've just tried to capture the tone of it. So like one example I was going to say is, so we just have posted this story about the slave. I would say all of that probably started with part 3, which was the slave woman.
Yes.
And that started with a second of a scene in the film Prince of Egypt, which I love. Prince of Egypt. If you haven't seen it, it's amazing. It's old, but it's amazing. But there's this moment on the Passover night where like this light, this like angel of death figure is, you know, doing its job, going around, and it comes to the land of Goshen, and it shows it like going up to each door and like darting away as soon as it sees the blood that's been painted on the door. And there's this one moment, like it's like a second, like I say, where the light comes up to this door and you kind of see it from the perspective of inside the door where there are cracks in the door. And this light is like almost trying to get in. and you see this mom, and she's sitting in the back corner. She's got 2 children in her arms. Like, they're a little older than how I, wrote the story. Probably, I don't know, like elementary school age children. And she wakes up and she sees this light, and she kind of like, and like holds them in closer to her for just a second. And then the light moves away, and she kind of is like, and then just goes back to sleep.
Yeah.
And even just that moment, I was like, what was going in her head in that moment? Like, oh my gosh, like the stakes of this are so crazy. So it's that, I guess it's that. That's a very specific way to answer your question.
But you know what I feel like I get out of that too is it's almost the thing that inspires is almost a curiosity.
That is a very good way to say it.
Based out of what you saw or interacted with.
That is interesting. This is inspiring me, even just hearing you say that.
Yeah.
That's a good way to name it.
I mean, because especially in that, it seems like what you just said.
Yeah.
What was going through her mind in that moment? And so that gets you onto a creative trail where you do some work on that. And then ultimately that's kind of how you ended up with this third part, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So that's how I can incorporate it sometimes. And like I say, people are a huge, huge, huge inspiration for me. So if I hear phrases from like them sharing a story or a problem, how God's working in their life, I can hear those phrases and I'll just like jot them down in my notebook. Again, I may use them exactly or I may not, but the idea intrigues me to be like, oh, I bet that's how this character felt in this situation in the Bible. And so, yeah, that's kind of
so good.
My rough process.
Totally. That's so good.
Still being figured out.
Oh, yeah. I think we're all still on the journey.
Yes.
Do you ever really have creativity figured out?
Oh
I don't
gosh.
think that you do.
I have not yet.
Well, I don't think anybody ever does.
Yeah. So we've talked about what things are inspiring us like lately. Are there things aside from that come to mind when you think of like what typically inspires you? Like what has in the past, or what do you tend to come back to again and again to find it?
I think for me, I'm very much an auditory person. Like everything is sound for me. That's what inspires me the most, both from a musical standpoint, but also just, sounds in general. And so I think typically it's songs that inspire me. And whether that be, a worship song, or whether it be an orchestral piece or a solo piano or whatever it is, it's generally melody, harmony, chords, right? Music.
Yeah.
And I think those are the main things. But then I think also coupled with that, I'm very much, I don't know how I would say it other than a information gatherer. I love collecting information and kind of like thinking through how that might inspire me as well. So definitely as I'm reading through the Word, I find that that's super inspiring. Kind of like what you said about your creative process, how the curiosity ends up being a bit of an inspirational boost, and just asking the question, man, what would that have been like? Or what would that have felt like? Or all those things. So reading through the Word, I definitely feel like can be inspiring, especially when it comes to lyrics, when I'm writing songs that way, because you can just start to put yourself into the places of the people in the Word, but also you can take the themes and the feeling of just the themes even.
Yeah.
And just do some thought and some work on those. And so I guess I'll just leave it there and I'll say, so music coupled with some inspiration from the Word and other, readings and things like that. I think those are those are my typical spots to find the creativity for sure.
Why do you think that is for you?
Yeah. Well, again, like I've said a few times now, and everything for me is sound.
Yeah.
Like there's something about creating things that are audible, and that I truly, I think a lot of it comes down to being little and growing up listening to a lot of classical music and just listening to, there's so much emotion in music, or there can be. There's a lot of music that has zero emotion in it, but there's a lot, I would say, just droves of music, tons of music.
Oh my gosh.
That is so emotional and that has such an impact. I think that's just been the thing. And I
Yeah.
think that's the reason why. And I think couple that also with, especially, you know, a worship song or something like that, that couples music with the word. It's a powerful combination for sure.
Oh, I totally agree. I think music is super powerful. Like, it creates such powerful memories and nostalgia too. Like, it certainly has power.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense. If like that's even your background growing up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
How that would still impact you now.
For sure. Yeah. So same question to you. What's your typical inspiration?
Yeah. I mean, again, it's not unlike what I've said, but I can perhaps be more specific with it. But I would say overall, it is for sure people. So, particularly hearing how God is working in someone's life. I love hearing people's testimonies as well. But if someone is sharing something that might be hard for them and how they're still trying to seek God in that, that's really inspiring to me personally. And then I feel like it's often that they'll say things probably because it's someone aside from me, so I'm getting a different perspective, or like this person's relationship with God versus my relationship with God. So they'll inevitably say something that I'm like, oh, that's so fascinating. Like, I haven't ever thought of that, or I have never thought of that coming to bear on this type of situation before.
Yeah.
So it helps me broaden my understanding of who God is. It helps me get to know the other person more. And then it helps me like broaden my scope of humanity, I guess, so that I can then write hopefully different kinds of characters, at least eventually write different kinds of characters.
Totally, yeah.
And I would say, even nuancing that even further, I really enjoy, I feel like God starts a lot of inspiration for me too in worship services. Through the sermon, like I'll pick up on things that are said there too, because usually that's actually preaching from the word. So definitely correlation there, but also I'm really touched by watching people worship, especially if I know part of their stories. So I'm thinking of a moment back in our church out east before we moved to the Midwest. There was a woman who had just lost her son in a pretty tragic accident. And I remember being on stage as part of the worship band that day. And I was just looking out and I was seeing her. And I can't remember what the song was now that we were singing, but it's certainly like, as we were singing it, I was thinking like, this is probably super hard stuff for her to sing or hear right now. Like, it was hard it would have been hard for her to declare what we were trying to declare as a church. And I just kept looking at her and I was like, just praying like, oh God, like, will you just like hug her right now? Like, will you just like be there for her? Or like, I was kind of trying to make eye contact with her because I knew that she knew that I knew what was going on. And I don't think she ever did, but like I did see a bunch of women end up coming around her and like hugging her in that moment. And just that type of stuff was super special to me. And just these tangible moments of people's relationship with God. I feel like that can be used so much in like stories. And then the word itself, like I said, is probably the starting point for most of it. So like 2 examples I can think of. There's a story I wrote about Eve that's coming up in a couple months, I think, to be posted. But that whole thing was inspired by reading Genesis and noticing that she is not named Eve until after the fall. Like, Adam does not name her Eve until after they've received all these curses. And I was like, what? Like, how did I not ever notice that? Like, that's a huge deal. Or like the slave story that we've just done.
Yes.
I was reading through Exodus 14, so like the actual Exodus, when the sea is being split, dried, whatever you want to say. And it says that all that night the Lord drove the sea back. So like, I think in my head, I had always just thought of that as like a quick moment where God's like, okay, Moses, stretch out your hand. And then the seed's like whoosh and it's done. But like the word says all night. And so like just thinking through those implications, that's the type of stuff, which again, I think you named it as curiosity.
Yeah.
But I think approaching the word, approaching our relationships, our discipleship, our worship through that curiosity, like that, I think we've used the phrase compassionate curiosity before, is usually where it starts for me. And then it just kind of goes from there.
Yeah, that's so good. I think, isn't it cool though to pay attention to that and how so much of creativity comes from curiosity,
Yeah,
right?
it is cool.
I mean, it seems like in a way it's like, oh yeah, well that makes sense. But at the same time, so often I feel like we veer away from curiosity, and specifically like what you're saying, compassionate curiosity towards people and towards feelings and towards noticings, if you will. It's just a cool thing to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Creativity, curiosity, compassionate curiosity, all related.
Yeah. Absolutely. For
Very
sure.
cool. And it's so cool to hear that though, like the different ways that all of the word really draws out both that curiosity, but then also the creativity.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it's a cool way to read the scriptures. And I have, like I say, I hadn't really done it much until the last few years. So it is interesting. Yeah. And I feel like God is faithful to bring up those moments of like, notice this. Like it's there. It's always been there, but you just don't always notice it.
And I mean, I think that goes to also show the importance of just being in the Word, even for the sake of creativity, the things that the Lord speaks. And again, just time with the Lord, the things that He speaks, man, those can be massively inspiring towards creativity. Those times, those readings, like whatever it may be. That's why, I mean, that's a part of the reason why we even here with this project, With You Collective, we value things like Lectio Divina and like just scripture readings, word of the Lord, because it can have an impact both on creativity, but also just on our own spiritual walk with the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
I was just about to say something like that.
Nice. High five.
Good.
Nice.
Yes.
That's awesome. Okay. Yeah, moving on.
Yeah, so let's kind of get away a bit from like the inspiration type of stuff.
Yes.
I feel like we've covered that pretty good. I'm curious, like, what's the piece, the creative piece that comes to mind if I were to ask you what your favorite one was that you've ever encountered?
Yes. And I would say I can't do it.
Yeah.
I can't do a favorite.
You can't do it.
I can't do a favorite.
Can you do a couple?
I can do, yes.
Okay.
So
I have a couple too, so go ahead.
Like the one that stands out for me is kind of going back to what I was talking about before. I remember as a kid, and I don't even know how old I was, because this was back when like my sister and I used to have babysitters that I remember this from.
Okay.
But there was a grocery store, random kind of story here that'll fill you in. There's a grocery store in our town where I grew up in the Midwest that it was in the 90s, and like we had just gotten a CD player. They'd been out for a while, but we started collecting these classical composers. And so we came one week, it was in the grocery store. They had, I think it was kind of like a weekly one or something. I don't know exactly how it worked. I was, again, fairly young then. But we got Grieg. And so there on that album was In the Hall of the Mountain King.
Okay.
Which is one of his compositions.
Yeah.
And that piece always stands out to me.
Okay.
Because it is such a dynamic piece that has tiny little parts, massive, huge parts, and you can just imagine what's going on. If you just close your eyes and put on some good headphones, and I stress good headphones, right? Put on good headphones and just listen with your eyes closed and let your mind fill in what's going on. It is such a cool piece. So In the Hall of the Mountain King by Grieg. And then I mentioned in the last podcast, but David Crowder's Come Awake, but on the A Collision album, which is pretty old now. Like I think that was like 2002 maybe.
Yeah.
2000. No, it might have been a little bit.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago. But I think that was another one. And again, like I mentioned in the last podcast, that was a pretty impactful moment for
Yeah.
me. But what I love about that song in particular is just the little violin motifs that happen throughout it, and then also just kind of the feel of it. It's not kind of your typical song. There's lots of creativity all the way through it, even down to the use of alarm clocks and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
timepieces of different kinds. So I think those two would be my quick top answers, and there are 1,000 more.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say those two for now.
Okay.
So
Can I throw a random one at you?
yes.
I'm curious, like, when you hear music,
Uh-huh.
especially when it's a piece like you're describing that's more orchestral or
Yes.
like at least not lyrical,
Yes.
like what goes through your mind?
Yeah.
What are you imagining when
It's-
you think that?
Well,
Or when you hear it.
specifically, yeah, specifically that one, in the Hall of the Mountain King, if you just take the title and run with that in your mind, like you just imagine, it starts out such a small piece, and it just builds into this big thing. And yeah, I think the quick answer would be just kind of from a sense of different compositions, you can get all sorts of different images, if you will, in your
Mhm.
mind. And sometimes, like in the case of that one, it's like I imagine a great hall and some sort of a battle taking place in it, because it just gets to this like frenzied spot. The pace picks up and things. But in other times, some of the Niels Fromm stuff from that Spaces album, it's almost like you can sense feeling and color in a way, which is kind of weird to say, but it just makes you really, when you just take time to stop, to slow, and to listen, it can kind of just draw out from a lot of different senses. I don't know if this is making sense at all, but it can
yeah.
draw out experience
Yeah.
in a way.
Cool.
That might not have made any sense, but I'm just going to go with it.
I'm going to guess creatives will understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah, it's
awesome.
good.
Cool.
Yeah. So how about for you? Favorite, most impactful? Can you narrow it to one?
I think one is hard.
I know.
It is hard. There are two that come to mind. And this might, it might not even be the actual literal, but just the ones that come to mind first. In college, I had a professor who I really admired that just was working on some really cool things in theater and directing, even apart from what we were doing in school. So she, I think, has continued to do this. She has written plays that are composed of interviews that she's done with people. So she'll take a subject. I think she did one about poverty. And then she literally interviewed like hundreds and hundreds of homeless people, or like people who are affected by homelessness, like different shelters and like up to the government, and all of this stuff. I think she's done one on racism, like in a specific town, and how the dividing lines of the town affected like this current status of racism in this town. And then she'll do these interviews. She'll compose this like still full length play based on these testimonies. And then she will direct these actors to portray these people. And it's like they'll have several characters that they portray. It's certainly not just one, because it is this span of like hundreds of people's testimonies. And so like the way that she's able to get their mannerisms, she doesn't edit out the natural flow of speech. So if someone says a lot, or, has a mannerism that they do with their hands or something, she'll have the actor replicate it. So it is like literally... I remember the first one I saw, I know that she had actually interviewed some of my friends at the time for this piece. And I was like, that's my friend. Like, I know from watching this person who is not my friend, but that's my friend's words, like just because of their mannerisms.
Yeah.
So it's just, that is fascinating, because I mean, how much more authentic can you get than like literally taking people's words and portraying them, but doing it in an artistic way.
Absolutely.
So like what she would do is staging, and like it was simple but dynamic. It was just really cool.
That is so cool.
So that is an inspiration to me. In terms of a very specific moment, this was also in college, around the time of Lent. And we actually had a mime that came to our college for like 2 years. He
Okay.
did like I don't know what you call it, but like he was like a adjunct professor, maybe.
Okay,
Is that
yeah,
the term?
sure.
It
Yeah.
might not be the term. Anyway, he was there for 2 years. And while he was there, I frankly had a pretty set perspective of what a mime was. And then he did this thing that I just still can't. I remember everything about it. He did a mime that impersonated the crucifixion, and he did it alongside a single person reading a psalm of lament. So there was no instrumentation. It was literally his movement and this man speaking this psalm. And like he was a legit mime in that he had clearly done research about what happens during this crucifixion. So, I mean, it was not gruesome because there were no props. Like he wasn't wearing makeup. Like it wasn't weird. It wasn't like, a white-faced mime.
Yeah,
it
sure.
was like just this person, like this authentic person moving. But it was at the same time incredibly gruesome because it was so accurate for what it would have been like to be crucified. So like the breathing and like the weight of trying to pull himself up and down on the cross to breathe. He didn't make noise, but again, it was just like this focused physical interpretation of the crucifixion while you're hearing the Psalm of Lament was super impactful.
Wow.
Like super.
That sounds incredible.
Crazy impactful.
And
unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it interesting too? You just said no music there.
Yeah, I know.
No, makeup or any props per se. Like it's just movement.
Stripped down. Totally stripped down.
Movement and the word is such an impactful thing.
Yeah.
And then I say music with, maybe some no words sometimes can be such an impactful thing.
Yeah.
I think
we're pretty simplistic, I feel.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes to show as well how much beauty there is in so many different types of art forms because God has created us to take in all of these different senses, if you will, of seeing these things and hearing these things and even smelling and tasting. Like, right? We have so many senses. And each one of those can be used in an artful way. And it can bring us, closer to God in actuality, which I think is just so cool. And I think even that is just, man, God, worthy of praise, right?
Absolutely.
So cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so kind of final question here.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Well, this feels funny now that I'm asking this question, but we had decided that we were going to ask this question.
Yes. That is funny.
What's your favorite creative piece of mine?
Yes.
So far.
Yes. That is kind of funny.
Weird.
Hey, so what's your favorite, what of mine is your favorite thing?
Pat me on the back here.
Yeah, that's right. No, really, we did talk about this before, and it was just this idea, because we've both been inspired by pieces that we've both done.
Right.
But now, in this moment, that is kind of funny. So anyway, I would say, I don't know that you have a title for it, but the piece that you wrote that was The Woman Caught in Adultery.
Yes,
did it have a title?
Well, I am still deciding on a title.
Okay.
For now, I think it's just called The Woman.
Okay, yeah. And, man,
yeah,
that's
funny, because that's the first one I think you read.
Yeah.
Is that true?
It's the first one of yours I think I read, because you had sent me the one, I think we talked about it on the last podcast, that your pastor out east had done some, and you sent me the recording of the one he did. And then when you did this one, man, it was just so helpful, again, through the written word, reading that, to like put yourself into the word of God in a way that sometimes we don't allow ourselves to. Again, we're such a rushed and busy culture that sometimes even just stopping on a passage or a story found in scripture, we just don't do it all that often. And I think that was one of the things about that piece that you wrote
And just that was a piece from John 8
Oh, yes.
about the woman caught in adultery.
Yes. And just taking time to read through that and to be impacted by, I think, just the way that you wrote in the creative margins, if you will, on that. And you filled in some of like the humanity of it. Because again, so many times we can read and remove ourselves from what it would have been like, or what you would have felt in some of those situations. And so I think of the pieces so far, that one and Eve, for sure, both upcoming.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, same for me.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly still love the Love Never Fails song, which you can't find.
I know. It's a bummer.
I know.
I was
we'll
looking
hopefully
at,
find it.
Yeah, I had it written. I even know it was on the right side of a moleskin journal on the right page. I just can't find that journal right now. So,
but I did love that song. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's we talk about it in our first podcast, but it was a song based on some good news or some like encouragement that I had heard from the Lord, and then you like fleshed it out in this song. I also really like the Christmas song you're writing. That's not super surprising given my love of
Christmas.
But I actually do really like the perspective from which you're writing it, like kind of drawing on John 1. What are you calling that one?
That's a great question. I think I called it.
We don't know what we're calling anything.
I know. That's one thing. It's like titling things.
Yeah.
I need some creative tips on titling things.
Yeah.
So
Let
that
us
it's
know
not
in
just
comments
the
if you have
Christmas
any.
song.
Yeah.
I think I called it what did
Something
I call
about light, right?
Yeah, I think so. I guess I could pull it up here, couldn't I? I don't know if I have it here with me or not. But
well, regardless, I do really like the perspective that you're taking with it. Drawing from John 1, drawing from light, piercing the darkness, all of that stuff.
Yes.
And that's upcoming.
Yes. Hallelujah, Christ has come.
Yeah.
That's
so nothing to do with light.
Nothing to do with light. But, I mean,
it's still one of my favorites, I promise.
Yeah.
Even if I don't remember the title.
Well, because titles.
Yeah. I do like
bus.
that. I will also say kind of a funny one.
Yeah.
Because like we've said before, like Glenn and I have worked together on lots of creative things, like not just songs and stories and like scripture stuff. But I really enjoyed, we both worked on a Good Friday service at our church this past year. And we came up kind of last minute with this lighting concept for the stage that you kind of like created and made happen. And that was super helpful. Like it was even more helpful for the actors than I anticipated. Like I remember the moment. So I'm trying to describe it. It's basically these like Edison light bulbs on top of these long posts, and they were all varying length and like spread throughout the stage to help light the stage, but also to like just create an aesthetic.
Yes.
And I remember it took a lot of work to get them all up there.
It did.
I remember that. But I remember like the first time I went up on stage when it was like set, like when all the other lights were set and the stage was set with like everything else that we were going to have on it. And I walked up there and I was like I felt the impact of what the lighting was going to do for the actors. And I'm a huge proponent of like the space helping set the tone.
Absolutely. Right.
For the actors. And it was for sure. Like I remember the rehearsal that night. I feel like all of the actors came and like gave even more than they had before because it was this like new and intentional environment. So that one even comes to mind just like from a broadened perspective of like some of the work you're able to do to create space and like lighting. I think it all has to do with tone for us. Like I think
so
we're
too.
both drawn to that a lot.
I think so too, because through all of these different mediums, if you will, through like we just said, the lighting the stage, how that's done, through what sounds we hear, through what things we can imagine through written word, through like pieces of art that are painted, through like
Yes.
all sorts of different things. Tone kind of carries it all.
Yeah.
What kind of a tone do we have? What kind of a feel do we have? And again, I think a lot of this stuff can be so helpful both for the church, but also just in general for creative practice and combining that with your spiritual life,
Mm-hmm.
which in actuality is your whole life. Your whole life is your spiritual life. And so pulling these things together, to me, it just it calls for worship.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in those moments, like what you said, being on stage with the lights, it's just like, man, I feel something here.
Yeah.
And again, we were doing that for Good Friday. And so it just helps to even draw the congregation into
Mm-hmm.
worship even more.
Mm-hmm.
Or in that sense, or in, you know, in that specific circumstance, into almost the darkening of Good Friday,
Yeah.
which is helpful for the bright hope that we have because of Easter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's so cool.
Yeah. I think it is. It all, I feel like all of our inspiration does come from worship in some way,
Yeah.
even if it's not in the formal church setting.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
what feels like inspiration also feels like worship, I think.
Yeah.
You know, even hearing some of what you were saying about how you're drawn to the music and like the moments that are created there.
Yes.
Like I imagine that feels similar to what your heart feels when you're like
Mm-hmm.
fully giving yourself to worship, because you're
Absolutely.
noticing and you're appreciating and you're seeing a picture of God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So cool.
It is cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. Well, I think that about wraps it up for our thoughts and I would almost say ramblings on creativity, right? I mean, we were a little bit all over the place, but it's all good. So that said, so grateful that you've been with us for this time. We'd
Yeah.
love it if you would jump on social media, follow us, give us a like, and then also on our website, sign up for the email list, because then you will get notifications of when there are new posts on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And that is super helpful because, as we all know, social media doesn't always give you the best notifications on when that stuff happens. So we'd love for you to do that. And again, one of the things that we love about doing this project is talking about creativity, but then also considering it how we do it as a collective of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd love to hear too, if you want to comment on the blog, comment on social media about what does creativity look like for you?
Yeah.
Where have you seen that at work? Where have you seen even a call to worship because of creativity or because of inspiration? We'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
So I think
clearly we are curious.
absolutely. Curiosity.
About other people's experiences.
Curiosity, tone, creativity. Let's do this.
Yes.
So thanks so much for being with us, and we will see you next time.